Hey, welcome back everyone to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and peace to everybody in the chat.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast. This is episode 88. So Kyle Rittenhouse, the vigilante in Kenosha, Wisconsin, was found not guilty on all charges of murder and criminal negligence. What's your take on the outcome of this trial?
Honestly, not too surprised. I thought possibly they could have gotten him on one going into the trial. I thought it was going to be hard to get the murder charges, but prosecutors do tend to overcharge. This seems to happen more frequently than it should in a lot of these higher profile cases. I think back to, there's an argument to be made in Trayvon Martin's case as well. I think some people were talking about the prosecutor may have overcharged and that messed up getting any sort of conviction. So I thought that could come into play. I thought if they were going to get him on something, I thought the gun charge and the negligent homicide charge or reckless homicide charge, I thought one of those they may have got him on those, but I seriously thought he would have gotten caught. I think he was going to get caught on a more serious murder charge. So, but when I saw the judge throw out the gun charge, I was like, oh, he's walking. Yeah, that was a slam dunk to me. If they once they threw that charge out and then they started citing a legal loophole in the law, to me that sort of signaled that prosecution really hadn't done their research like they should have. Additionally, to just in general, from listening to people comment on the trial, they seem to think that the prosecution really did not anticipate having a judge that was going to be, in a lot of people's opinion, very much in favor of the defense. Be it him throwing out, being it the appeals that were made, throwing out the gun charge, just the general behavior of the judge was not partial at all. I believe there was one of the key witnesses was getting ready to testify, and it was Veterans Day, and he said, who's a veteran? And he's the only one, obviously, who's a veteran in the courtroom. And it's, applaud this man. He's a veteran. Veterans Day. Obviously, being the judge, who's going to be speaking next. You should have known that he was a veteran as well. You should have known something about their background. So a lot of people thought that was really biased and really helped the defense as well. So just behavior like that, just really signaled to me that he really I just didn't think he was going to be convicted, and it just seemed a lot to be in his favor.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, but I also think that there's a lot to be said about the recentering of white men in post-Obama, right? There's this idea that, either you vote for Trump or you vote for another white person, right? Same thing with Trump versus Biden, right? It's this recentering of white men, and you see that now on the ground with the class collaborators such as Kyle Rittenhouse, such as the Proud Boys, such as the Oath Keepers, such as all these sort of paramilitary groups taking, center stage every opportunity. And I think Trump really brought all of this out, because this happened under Trump, didn't happen under Biden. And so this judge puts himself, leverages his privilege as a judge and recenters the conversation around Kyle Rittenhouse as a white male versus these other people. Now, some people will say, well, these other guys, they were white too, so it's not a black issue. But in reality, these guys were at the protest because it was a BLM protest. The other person that was killed, the one with the skateboard, I forget his name right now, but he basically was the friend of Jacob Blake. He actually knew Jacob Blake. And so what I'm saying here is that they have created this sort of new social space, or this white men being at the forefront of everything ideologically speaking to America, and that somehow these other people can't be called victims because they were looters and rioters and stuff like that. But in reality, they weren't rioting or looting, according to witnesses in the video. And so what I'm saying here overall is that the judge made sure that Kyle was seen as this sort of person, as the face of justice, that somehow he could never be wrong, and taking the gun charge off the table was a way to dismantle the prosecutor's ability to actually find any justification if he was not convicted of murder, which he was not. He would have been convicted of a gun charge. And so that was those sort of key elements of making sure that white men are always at the forefront, that their privilege is not to be challenged, at least under his court of law.
Yeah, that's one angle that I thought was going to come into this, was the whole idea of, obviously, I think the fact that the hunting technicality was able to be used was head scratching to me, because you don't need an AR-15 and body armor to go hunting.
At night.
Yeah, at night, exactly. And in Kenosha of all places, not too much wooded area to go hunting there, unless you're talking about people. So I mean, it was clear he was going to quote unquote defend property and confront people, protesters, and things like that. So to me, I always thought that it was going to be centered in a sense of that, even though that was not the main question at heart, that was going to be the issue that I thought could resonate in some jurors' minds as well too, is legalities aside, or if it's in a gray area, at the end of the day, what would I have done in that situation? Or do I want there's no legal precedence, obviously, but do I want to be able to send the message to people that, hey, if they feel that property is being threatened, or my property is being threatened, that I can't go and confront people. And to me, that was always sort of an angle that I felt like was going to come into play as well. Or people, a lot of people maybe in Kenosha may play into sort of that sympathy of, oh, well, if I felt that my neighborhood was under attack, I would have done the same thing as him. So, if there's any gray area to, give him the benefit of the doubt, that's what I'm going to do. And to me, that ties into the greater just narrative of vigilantism in American society. And I was telling people the other day in a room that essentially, hey, what you really, in my opinion, see under attack here, and as a result of this, will be more attack on First Amendment, because essentially what you're, in my opinion, setting the stage for is for people to now feel like it's okay to confront people who are protesting with weapons, embolden people to go and do this. And on the other end, I believe one of the people he ended up killing also had a gun as well. You could also provoke a confrontation now, because at the end of the day, if Kyle doesn't confront these people and lets law enforcement deal with that, I don't think anyone gets hurt that night. But obviously, he decides to go and confront these people. Shots get fired, 2 people get killed, 1 person seriously injured. So to me, it's just it sort of sets up for those sort of events to become more common, especially when we see just how much protest has been at play, especially recently with police shootings and things like that, and the response of protesting and the riots' general assertion that, hey, these aren't protests, these are riots. So
yeah, but what's really interesting to me is that he walked past police. He got around just fine without being confronted by law enforcement during a civil unrest. Keep this in mind, that he's walking around, civil unrest, shots are fired. His barrel has to be smoking at this point. And no confronting from the police itself, and he walked right past with his hands up, like, hey, I just shot somebody. Police offer some water. This is under civil unrest. Now, Jacob Blake, the police were in fear that he would go to his vehicle. Now, before even going to his vehicle, they had pepper sprayed him, they had tried to tase him, and he was unarmed. And the fear was that he would go to his vehicle and get a gun. Now, they fear him to reach for something that he didn't even have. This guy is walking around with a long barrel rifle in the middle of a civil unrest, and there's no question as to what is he doing out here with this weapon. As shots were fired. Like, typically what I've seen during civil unrest is that police will try to disarm as many people as possible if they can. In this instant, this guy is just walking around as if, it's just Sunday and he's just out there for a stroll. And I'm like, I don't know, based on some of the interactions that I'm seeing with law enforcement on different occasions, Black men are always suspected to be guilty of carrying something on them, even if they have nothing. But a white male walking around, it's almost as if he, it's almost as if he is seen as just by their eyes. He's just, and everybody else isn't. And I think that plays a significant role into how the judge kind of framed this, right? This sort of recentering of the white male, and that's unfortunate because him antagonizing his people, there was nothing to be gained out of it. Like somebody said, oh, well, he walked around with a fire extinguisher, he was scrubbing down graffiti and stuff like that. Okay, but did they really need you doing that? I mean, doesn't Kenosha have their own fire department? I don't get like the logic behind this, that he played first responder without being a certified first responder, and everybody's supposed to give him a round of applause. That is just, to me, it's outrageous. Also the judge allowing him to look over his shoulder, in the middle of a courtroom. I'm like, I don't know, man. Picking his names out of a hat or out of the container to see which juror is going to read off these, the final verdict.
Yeah, and then I think there was also I think they said something confusing surrounding the jury instructions. So to me, it just, everything kind of spelled from when the trial started. Like you said, everything from what protesters could be had to be called rioters or looters to
language,
the gun charges being thrown out to the comments about the jury instructions. To me, it just kind of set up it just set it up for, hey, I didn't think he was, like I said, I thought maybe just the reckless behavior, because like I said, I thought what he did was very reckless, but that was the only shot I think they had I thought they had at that point, and that didn't pan out. So
yeah, definitely. I just, I think this sets a precedence again, like you said before, about the First Amendment more so than the Second. And when it seems like when it comes to Black people protesting, or even people on the left protesting, there's always this urgency to confront those people on the left. We saw that in Charlottesville. We saw that, this person who traveled across state lines to ram his vehicle into leftist protesters who largely were peacefully demonstrating. Again, people peacefully demonstrating, banging drums and stuff like that, because they have the ability to play music or whatever it is that they're doing. They're doing their chants, no justice, no peace. And this guy goes into a rage and decides, I'm going to ram my vehicle across these people on the left because I don't like them and their ideology. Right? And so I watched the interview with him, and he said basically he was tired of people not doing anything on the right. He wanted more action. But we also saw this with Dylan Roof, that in his manifesto, he was tired of people on the right not being more actionable against what he considered to be Black people. Rather, these Black people who are Black men, especially, who are going around raping white women and causing this injustice to white people. And in reality, that never really happened. But what I'm saying here is he went to a peaceful, again, Another peaceful demonstration, people praying inside of a church, a historic church on top of that, and being invited in to pray with them, and then he kills these people. And so what I'm saying, there's a repeat of white male aggression against black people and people on the left for no other reason other than because they're on the left. And you know, Kyle Rittenhouse is kind of setting the precedence that if you are on the left and they have a problem with it, they have a right to confront you over it. I'm saying, where does this make any sense, legally speaking and politically speaking?
Oh, it doesn't make any sense. But like I said, there's no legal precedent set for it. But like I said, I think it's just more of the social precedents that's set for it, and what's going to be the fallout. We'll have to watch for the next major protest that breaks out, whether it be around racial justice or just protest in general, and see the response, especially in an area like a city where you have suburbs that has your traditional makeup of more minorities living within the city limits, and then essentially people who are white living on the outskirts coming into the city. That dynamic seems to, I sort of think back to the Michael Brown case, that sort of same scenario of layout of police and police sympathizers, hardcore police sympathizers living outside the city, versus minorities living within the city wanting more police reform, things along those lines. So
I think that this could actually hurt the Democratic Party politically in 2022. At first, you had Biden come out and kind of shunt Kyle Rittenhouse when he came into office, or before he came into office. And now, after the verdict comes out, he says, well, the jury has spoken, and basically you have to trust in the process and the system, and this, people have spoken. That doesn't bode well for people, but the victims on the left in Kenosha and in Wisconsin, and people, black people across the board who came out and voted for him. And so I think it's important for the Democratic Party to understand that messaging is really key here in a time like this. Because if you're saying that the people who come out and support you can't even look to you for support, on tragedies like this, then they may not want to come out and support you later. Now, when Trayvon was shot, you had Obama come out and say, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. Very impactful statement, as benign as it was. I mean, it made headlines everywhere. I think that I saw a news cover with Trayvon and Obama's face next to each other, and in reality, he does look just like Obama in his younger years, which I found really interesting. That actually helped galvanize the left, right? People came out and supported, different candidates after he made that statement, and actually radicalized the base to usurp any sort of right-wing candidates at the time. And actually, the right was failing all over the place. And they were looking for their next great white hope for 2016, because 2014, it was a very scary moment for them. They didn't really have anybody that can respond to Obama at the time. And so I'm saying the Democratic Party was a lot more united back then, in my opinion, on sort of racial justice issues than they are now, because the white liberal is paying lip service, but they're not actually following through with real actionable items on the table. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has pretty much went null and void.
Yeah, that's dead. But I mean, I always put that back on Republicans too, in the sense of you have Tim Scott who really just torpedoed that bill, and ironically, you had police unions who supported portions of it as well. So, but I agree with you on the messaging part.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that maybe this radicalizes the base for 2022. Maybe it makes them walk back and question whether or not they should come out in 2022. A lot of time is still left, but if anything else happens after this point, that can spell doom and gloom or otherwise for the party itself, because this is really it's just as much political as it is one of justice. And so that part has to be taken into consideration, that there is a political angle at this, and that BLM being at these protests, BLM is not on the right, they're on the left. So that has to be understood. So if you can't go out and peacefully demonstrate without guys like Kyle Rittenhouse coming to confront you and getting away with it, it may make people a little bit more angry than that they typically would have been had this thing had not happened. But we saw this in Washington, D.C. During the Trump administration last year. You had BLM protesters in Washington, D.C., and you had Proud Boys come down there to confront them. Again, peaceful protesting, drawing on the street, only for when night falls, you had white males coming to confront, black people on the left. I mean, this is a repeated pattern from what I can see. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, that was my whole thing, was sort of when I was trying to tell people that essentially your First Amendment is being trampled on by the Second Amendment. That's essentially what this case is going to spell, in my opinion.
Now, swinging into Georgia with the Ahmaud Arbery case of the McMichaels versus State, or State versus the McMichaels. And so they were found guilty. I didn't think this would have been a big problem, to find a slam dunk on this, because all the evidence was on tape, right? I mean, because only a week before Kyle Rittenhouse had gotten off, a lot of disappointment. They were saying, well, if Kyle gets off, these guys are going to get off. But in reality, these guys have admitted on the stand that Ahmaud Arbery really did not do anything wrong, other than he had happened to be in their area at the wrong time.
Yeah. In this instance, to me, this trial was, if I had to choose, obviously don't want to choose to, but this one I thought, Rittenhouse getting off, that was one thing. But this one I thought, hey, if this one goes the wrong way, I thought definitely it just could have gotten bad as far as, what the response would have been. Because I definitely would have saw like mass protest, and it would have signaled once again vigilantism wins the day. But what was happy to see the verdict come in. The one concern I sort of felt, as I was alluding to earlier, was once again people in the jury box feeling some element of sympathy, in the sense of they would have acted similarly, or sort of extrapolating that same mentality of, hey, if someone was in my neighborhood that I would know, I wouldn't think it was unreasonable to behave in this way. So that was the one thing that sort of made me nervous in this trial. Obviously, the judge behaved a lot more professionally. Some people pointed out they thought maybe there could have been a generational gap, in the sense of, when you look at the Rittenhouse judge, he was a little bit older, and that that behavior from older judges is kind of be the expected, because they purely grew up in the era of all white judges, good old boys networks, things like that. This judge was a little bit younger, not super young, but younger, and didn't go for a lot of the defense attorneys' shenanigans and asking for mistrials. So definitely happy, obviously, to see the result. I think the next step that I want to see is some accountability for the prosecutors as well, because I was in a room talking with some people about the trial and how this all began. Because I remember when this when this whole scenario first came out, the big thing that really brought national headlines to it was a New York Times story, and basically they sort of laid out the events, but you didn't have the video. And then the video came out, and that really blew things wide open for a lot of people. Video came out, obviously, and you had federal charges, you had GBI bringing up felony murder charges. Ironically, the video came out, you had good guys in the manosphere trying to still defend this craziness, which is crazy in and of itself. And I haven't seen too many streams with people trying to justify where the jury got it wrong. So that was mind-boggling in and of itself. But the ironic thing too, I thought, the reason this video came out is the defense lawyer and the guy who shot the video thought it would vindicate them. So it is quite ironic how things turned out. Like I said, it turned out turned out obviously to bring justice to the Arbery family, but it's just it's just crazy that, like I said, when the defense attorney thought that it would vindicate them, when the person who shot the video thought it would vindicate them, I was worried that same mentality would have been embedded in the jury box. So glad to see that didn't occur.
Yeah, a lot of guys who were trying to defend, the McMichaels last year, they're conspicuously missing and absent at this point, after the verdict comes out. And so a lot of people hinge their credibility on McMichaels actually being found not guilty. For how they would find something like this, I have no idea. You cannot shoot people over property. You cannot use violence over property. You cannot create a citizen's arrest just because, a person is walking down the street or traveling down the street. A lot of people, and this really frustrates me in the media, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, he was just jogging, minding his business. It doesn't matter what he was doing. As long as he wasn't breaking the law, he was perfectly within his legal right to travel freely within the environment. That part is what, that part really ticks me off, because when it comes to this, everyone's trying to find this sort of, this sort of benign picture of, or this perception of, Ahmaud Arbery, traveling freely. And I'm like, no, he was moving along in the environment on his own. Why do we have to paint this pretty picture for him? No, he had the right to move along on his own. These guys came out, pickup truck and all, more than one weapon, to attack this person based on the fact that he was black and male. And so we saw the same thing with Trayvon Martin. Hoodie over his head, walking down the street, minding his business. Some white person decides, I'm going to confront this guy. And so we see these sort of repeated patterns of behavior amongst white males who feel it's in their God-given right to go out there and confront black people, right? Because the same thing with Trayvon Martin. Oh, George Zimmerman, Neighborhood Watch, self-appointed, right? Similar with the McMichaels. Somehow they were some kind of Neighborhood Watch group. They felt that they had to go and confront this person. Repeated patterns of behavior, different time periods. Trayvon was 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And you see that in all of these cases, you see white men who feel that they have every legal right to confront you, and as well as ideological position to do it as well. But people will tell you that they don't see color, there's no such thing as racism. I don't see how this is possible. In reality, all of these cases all point to one central issue, which is lack of federal enforcement of policies that would prevent these guys from ever thinking about going out there and actually confronting you unjustly. And I want to make it clear that this is just in the public. When you're at work, at least in my experience as a black man, you have the same exact thing. We saw this at Facebook a few months ago, I think maybe a year or so ago, during the George Floyd protest, that a black man was treated unjustly at work as well, just for the fact that he was black. And we also saw this at Google recently, where a black man was just roaming around on campus, and he was confronted by security and escorted off of campus as if he didn't work there, even though he did work there. There's this idea that black people and black men in particular, their place of belonging is to be questioned at all times, no matter what the environment is, whether it's corporate America or on the street in the public, whether you're peacefully demonstrating. You have to be challenged at all given times, because they that's the way they see it. But don't blame racism, don't blame race. It's somehow, conspicuously absent from the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously race played a major role in this. I mean, I obviously there's federal hate crime charges pending, and obviously, I believe it was the Roddy Bryant, who was the man filming. I believe it was Travis McMichael. Saying essentially that he said the N-word after he shot Ahmaud Arbery. So, obviously that played into it, and also you have to look at it from the angle of, the essential argument for giving chase was they thought he was a suspect from a series of break-ins, which I never really heard them pointing to, hey, what series of break-ins are you referring to? So to me, I think they definitely, race played a major part. They pretty much saw someone who was black in the neighborhood and assumed the worst and gave chase, because I believe even when they're calling 911, they're asking like, hey, what crime is he committing? I need you to tell me that. They can't really tell them. So, that's clear that in this case, that is what happened. And people who try to downplay it, I don't know what planet they're living on.
Or what kind of drugs they're on. Because as we see in the trial itself, even they admitted on the stand they really didn't have a justification for going after him, other than the fact that he was black. In the area, that somehow they have self-deputized themselves to go after people who don't look like them. And so this has been culminated by the last administration. People will say, oh, he didn't have anything to do with it. I beg to differ. I would say that these guys were emboldened. Now, when these federal charges come down and the investigation begins and they start going through these text messages and these social media platforms that they're registered to, and what was said at the time that this incident happened and prior to that, that is going to be extremely damaging to their credibility. I mean, obviously at this point, they'll never see the light of day after being sentenced. I think the federal charges will just completely bury them under the dungeon. But what they're going to find in their communications is that, from a forensic standpoint, if there's any text messages that says anything along the lines of he was a nigger, or he was a darkie, a blackie, anything that insinuates anything about his ethnicity or his racial makeup, anything like that, anything egregious that can tie these guys back into it being a racial issue for them, they're in some deep trouble. And I would say that there's probably going to be a lot more people who may be involved in this, or maybe involved with the McMichaels, because what kind of websites were they at? Because with Dylan Roof, he was on Stormfront. With the Proud Boys and some of these other vigilantes, they were a part of Parler, right? And so you see this sort of consistent trail of evidence that shows that they're always connected to some other platform that emboldens them to galvanize and engage people out in the public who they see that as their opposition.
Yeah, they definitely had video floating around that showed not video. They had evidence floating around, I think, that showed they pretty much someone took a picture of his body, and I think it was maybe a WhatsApp or a Snapchat or something, that they were actually sharing pictures, because that came out, I want to say, like a few days after when they started really digging into the case. So I'm assuming more of that will play more of a role in the federal trial. But there was definitely some communications afterwards going on through text message and other social media platforms that obviously if they should be allowed into the trial, that will be interesting, because I'm sure there's evidence we haven't heard of yet that may have not made it in this trial.
Yeah, definitely. I just think these are very interesting times that we live in when it comes to, you know, these two cases. And these won't be the only two cases so far that we'll hear about. We'll hear about many more as the time goes by. And maybe some of these other cases will be reopened, because I have heard, you know, Tamir Rice's mother wants to reopen the case against that officer as well. So we could see, you know, all sorts of pieces on the chessboard moving around that does have some socioeconomic and political impact going into the future. Any last words?
No, like I said, I think, you know, two trials, two different outcomes. Obviously would have liked to have seen both go in the directions of convictions, but I think, you know, it just kind of shows what times we're in, that, you know, vigilantism is condoned. There are a lot of people, to a certain extent, there are a lot of people who think it's okay. Like I said, look at the two trials that we had, the people who, the way they thought, the numerous sympathizers and supporters that they had. Like I said, the evidence that in the Arbery trial where they thought that would actually vindicate them. So this mentality is out there, and I think it's only going to continue to be emboldened for the foreseeable future.
Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.